Matthew 25:31-40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of this holy word this day.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated.
I want to start my message today by reading a poem to you. It's a poem that was written by Howard Thurman. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's called "The Work of Christmas Begins." When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the people, and to make music in the heart. That was, as I said, written by Howard Thurman in a book titled "The Mood of Christmas and Other Celebrations." And if you're interested, it's really a nice little book to read. It has a lot of good things in it. And even though we're still in the afterglow of Christmas, we're still officially in the 12 days of Christmas. Let's see, I think this might be day, 6 or 7? 6? 6 geese a laying, I think, is today. In case you're busy getting those gifts together. You've unwrapped presents. You've eaten way more than you probably wished you had. Maybe some of you have even taken down your tree, or you soon will. You've had family visited, and maybe some of them have already left. You've sung Christmas carols and enjoyed the season. In a few days, school will be back in session, and if you haven't already had to go back to work, it's coming soon. Christmas is over, and the new year is almost here. And in fact, someone commented, I think it was even before Christmas, that they had gone to the store and that the Valentine's candy was already out. So as you can see, the world tells us that it's time to move on. Well, I can imagine that Mary and Joseph probably felt that same way once the shepherds got through visiting and the wise men had gone on their way. They had a baby to take care of, and they had gifts to decide what to do with. And they had to get back into the daily routine of life, of living. But there's more to that story, and we'll talk about it probably in some of the stuff we talk about next week. But we also know that it wasn't long before Joseph had a dream telling him that he needed to take Mary and the baby and go to Egypt, to a place where they would be safe. So right from the beginning, their Christmas wasn't going to be normal anymore. And this birth of this child of theirs was only the beginning of a life of unexpected things to come. And I think the same is true for us. Even if we've managed to focus our attention on the birth of Christ at Christmas, we still get caught up in all the rush of the season, and we still find ourselves doing and being and giving and all those kinds of things, even maybe more than what we wish. And you all know that Christmas isn't about the presents or the decorations, and it isn't about the traveling and the cooking and the rushing around and the racing from place to place. It's ultimately not even about the arrival of a baby in a manger, because really the beginning of Christmas is now. This is when the real work of Christmas begins. Now is the time when we're called to do the work that we have to do every day, the work that Christ has called us to, the work that the Scripture tells us about, and Howard Thurman's poem reminds us of is now the work of Christmas begins, and now we have to get back to tending to the sick and healing those that are broken and feeding the hungry and releasing those that are prisoner and bringing peace among all the people. This is the work of Christmas, and it begins now, because it's our work to do. And it might seem overwhelming, and indeed it can be at times overwhelming, but we are called as followers of Jesus Christ to do the work of Christmas, not just be available at Christmas, but to do the work throughout the year that Christmas calls us to do. And I've told you before, and I hope you begin to believe that when God calls us to do work, that God equips us with all that we need to get that done. We don't know how it will happen. We can't sometimes see the end of it. But just as God provided for Mary and Joseph and that baby Jesus, God will provide for us. So we enter a new season. Christmas isn't really behind us, but Christmas is ahead of us. Because that's what Jesus is calling us to do, to move on, to go out into the world now and do the work of Christ in the world. So the work of Christmas is just beginning. I think we need to see Christmas as the beginning rather than the end. Because I know that this is a counterintuitive way of thinking, because once Christmas is over, we put everything back in the box and then we go back to life, and we figure, it's easy for us to assume that Christmas is the end. But I want us to think about Christmas being the beginning of a great and wonderful outreach and mission and work of the church. We build ourselves up so much in preparation for Christmas, and then it seems to evaporate like a snowflake in the sunshine. It's gone in an instant, and we forget. But if we have our lives lived through the eyes of Christmas, then we have that hope in us all the time that is the hope of Christmas that we hear about. And when we have those moments of despair, we can always go back to the sense of what joy and what comfort and what peace we have when we celebrate Christmas. Because we need to remember that the story of Mary and Joseph and Jesus didn't end at Christmas either. Their lives and their story were just beginning. The Christmas story tells us and emerges for us as a story of a family who is uncomfortable, who is vulnerable, and who has to proceed through regular life, caring for a child, making a living, being compassionate and loving and caring family. Christmas was just the beginning for Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And so the setting for us for Christmas certainly tells us that God enters into the world and the work of Christmas begins. And I like the idea that Howard Thurman wrote in this poem of his, that the work of Christmas has only just begun. And so I want us to look for just a moment of what that Christmas work looks like, what it is that we're called to do. And I think that our scripture lesson today is one that gives us an idea. It tells us that we're supposed to clothe the naked and feed the hungry and visit the sick and those that are in prison. And Howard Thurman's poem goes on to reiterate those things and tell us that we need to look beyond the celebration of Jesus' birth to what it truly means for us in our daily lives. And I think that Christmas reminds us that we need to consider the work of Christmas, the work of making room in our lives, making space in our lives for God. Now, it's easy for us to do that at Christmas because we're reminded over and over again that this is what the true meaning of Christmas is making space for Jesus in our lives. But I think that we need to carry that forward. This child that was born of Mary and Joseph in that manger came into the world in an unconventional place because the scripture tells us there wasn't any room for them. And we tell that story as a way of reiterating the humbleness of Jesus' birth. And sometimes I think we're inclined, and we talked about this a little bit, but we're inclined to make the innkeeper out to be, or the person who didn't offer them a place to stay, as some sort of a villain, that it was somehow disgraceful that there wouldn't be room for this family and for Jesus to be born. But I think if we're truthful, we might see more of the innkeeper in ourselves than we might like to admit, because we live our busy lives with little patience for anything that isn't planned for. We don't make room often in our lives for things to happen unexpectedly. And we certainly often forget that we need to make room on purpose for Jesus in our lives. So when we get interrupted, or when an appointment isn't met, or when we have an unexpected crisis, then we become the innkeeper and we hoard our space. And we don't make room for things to come to us in special and unexpected ways. And it's as if there's no room in our hearts, or whatever word you want to use for that. And I think Christmas tends to magnify all of the things that are going on. And, our schedules are full, our stomachs are full, our minds are full of all the things that we have to do. And it's easy for us to put aside and to not make room for the things that really matter. And of course, when Christmas is over, what's the first thing that we do? Well, we put the Christmas decorations back in the box. We take baby Jesus out of the manger and put it all back in a nice, neat little storage. And we put it away in a closet and we move on. Because life is there. We have important things to do. But we also need to remember that when we stuff the things of Christmas away too quickly, even metaphorically, or most importantly metaphorically, that we're stuffing away the most essential part of who we are and what our story is all about. And I think that when we put the stuff of Christmas away, that it tends to be an impediment on our lives, because we forget about what it was that we just celebrated. And we do the everyday. And we forget that we need to make room for Jesus in our hearts. We like it when our house gets back into order. I don't know if you're this way or not, but there's a lot of stuff around us at Christmas that's not normally there. Trees and decorations and garlands and what all it is, that we do in order to get ready for the season of Christmas. But there is something about putting things back in the box and having things being orderly that we kind of like too. Because we can look around and we can see and we can take a breath and we have that moment where we go, oh yeah, okay. It's all going to be all right. It's all back to normal. But maybe you've had the experience that never really happens. Things don't always go back in an orderly way, the way we want them to, because life happens. But this is the perfect time for us to take a moment and invite Christ to be a part of our lives, to have room in our hearts to invite Christ in. And I think that's some of the work of Christmas that only begins once we think of Christmas as being over. So I think the first work of Christmas is to create space for God and for Jesus in our lives. I think that another thing that the work of Christmas calls us to do is to live in the tension between being and doing. And if you think this isn't tension-ridden, then think again, because there is a big tension between being and doing. I think we can have good thoughts and offer good prayers and sing good songs, but the tension is that we also have to do good things. And so we have to live in the tension between knowing what we should do and doing what we should do. And to live into the tension is what Christmas calls us to do. Bishop Reuben Job said this. He said, we need to see tension as a fertile place of growth, a place of struggle, and to see it, in fact, as a gift from God. Because really, if you think about it, we're trying to integrate an inward journey with an outward journey out into the world, because that's what God calls us to do. And so you have to know that there's going to be some tension there. Because as we try to integrate our lives in the real world and integrate our spiritual lives in a different kind of world, there's bound to be some tension there. Things get in the way, unexpected things happen, and we have to make room. Well, that's what the gospel of Christmas is about. Christmas joined together heaven and earth. The Word was made flesh and lived among us. And so there's that tension between heaven and earth. And so this incarnation, this heaven coming to earth, brings to us a sense of tension that we live in. Because then it makes it even more clear that we're spiritual people in a material world. We're human beings hungering for things of the Spirit. You see how that tension is created. Constantly battling against itself, the earth and the spirit, trying to make amends with each other, if you will, or trying to get along. But tension also, we need to remind ourselves, is a good thing. Because this tension is caused because we desire to do God's work. We desire to have God's presence with us. And we do that by doing earthly work in God's name. I also think that the work of Christmas is us allowing the light that comes at Christmas to shine through us into the world. Now I realize I'm not saying anything you haven't heard before. This is all the stuff that the preachers preach all year long. But I think if we do it with the idea that this is the work of Christmas, that maybe we'll take it on in a little more meaningful way. That there is a miracle and mystery about Christmas. But it's a miracle and mystery that gives meaning to our lives. Because think about it this way. At Christmas, everything on earth changed. Because God came to this earth in human form. Everything on earth changed at Christmas. Nothing would ever be the same. And we are called to be witnesses of the light that came at Christmas. And the only way that that happens is by what we do. That's the work of Christmas. It's not the song of Christmas. It's not the scripture of Christmas. It's not the gift of Christmas. It's the work of Christmas. And the work of Christmas reminds us that we have the power to be the light in the world, the light that Scripture talks about that darkness cannot overcome. That's our job, to be that light in the world. And it means that we're going to be in tension with one another and in tension with ourselves, because this is not an easy task. Because we have to take that light that is in us seriously. We have to take it into ourselves, internalize it in such a way that we begin to understand what it is that we're called to do. See, God wasn't content just to come and take on flesh. God wasn't content with just sending Jesus to the world and having him preach some nice sermons and beatitudes and, heal a few people and do some miracles. That wasn't enough for God. Because God wanted us to understand that we can have a tangible and personal relationship with God, and that we then are called to acts of justice and mercy. So the work of Christmas is this: to take the light that we hold in our hearts, the light that we hold up, represented by candles on Christmas Eve, that we take that light out into the world, to the hurting, to the hungry, and to the homeless, and to those that are in prison. That the work of Christmas is about taking the Christmas story out into the world, knowing that it's not a finished story. That the Christmas story continues through us. And we have to make room for God to work in us, We have to create space for God to inspire us. And we have to come to know that the work of Christmas is the most vital work of all that we need to do. So let us begin today to think of the story of Christmas not ending on Christmas, but just beginning. Let us make the story of Christmas, the work of Christmas, our work that begins today. Let us create space for God to enter into our lives. Let us live in that tension and give thanks for that tension because it motivates us to do good work. And let us remember that Christmas isn't over in a few minutes because Christmas lasts a lifetime.